This video or episode, if you're listening, features an insightful, interesting, and adventurous conversation with two American businessmen who started and spent the majority of their careers in China. They're back in the United States now, of course, because of the pandemic and haven't quite gone back yet. But this conversation goes through their first impressions of getting there in the late 90s, early 2000s, how they got opportunities, and how it developed from where it was when they first got there to now. That part of the conversation will develop more in other episodes. I find it very exciting to talk about. I think you'll also find it very exciting because this is an inside look of what it was like to be a part of the economic miracle that was China the early 2000s until, say, 2017, 2018. This, again, is not an endorsement of the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, you'll probably get an impression that is consistent with some of the things you've heard. But at one point, as you know, China was the place to be for economic growth and entrepreneurial opportunity, as is a lot of other entrepreneurial hotbeds in the United States and other places. So without further ado, here is Jeff and Dave, my two good friends that I made when I lived in China, and I continue to hang out with, talk to, communicate with, and be friends with. Forgot to tell you, like, comment, and subscribe to be alerted for the next part of this conversation. Here we go. I think it'd be cool to talk about your China experience in the time span that you were there. Nobody's ever going to understand unless they go there and they experience it. But we've talked about all of this at length. Dave, at one point, I probably should have paid you to be my China recovery therapist or China integration back into American society therapist, even though you were there for 6 months. When you first went to China with the intent to move there, when was it and what was the first thing you noticed?
So I went in 1996, at the end of 1996, which was really, looking back, I mean, it was pretty wild. At the time, I didn't know any better. I'd never been to China, never been to Asia. I'd traveled a little bit, traveled to Europe. So I wasn't like a guy that just sat in Alabama his whole life or Mississippi and, didn't go anywhere. But definitely was a shock. It wasn't a bad shock. I didn't feel like, oh, what have I done? Or, what am I doing? I'm sure I had moments of that, of course, in the early months and maybe even the early years. To China, I flew into Hong Kong, which is definitely not China. Definitely looks more like China now than it did, but it was like flying into New York City and then somehow like going back 50 years when you drove 10 miles and got over the border, and then it was like going back in time. And so for me, the initial look of China, initial kind of maybe shock or impression of China was, wow, this is backwards. You had a lot of construction going on, in Shenzhen when we came across the border. You had interesting little things that they did, like we showed up to the border at 12:01, and you could get your visa at the border at the time. So we were going to get our visa and go into China, and all of a sudden, 12:01, I see everybody in the window, and I'm like, hey, we're going to get our visa now, and they're like, no, it's lunchtime. I'm like, yeah, but you're right there. I see you. You can just like stamp this thing. And no, so we had to wait till like 2:30 in this, little immigration hall. That was kind of my first experience of the China bureaucracy, which is still there today, no doubt, but definitely less, maybe more in certain cases. But came across the border, saw guys tearing down buildings with sledgehammers and right on top of each other, and just really wild stuff. And kind of couldn't believe I was there. It was one of those things, I think, since when we all show up in China, we're kind of like, this is crazy. Like, this is not my life. This is like some other person's life. And you hadn't really resigned yourself to the fact that you're going to live there. So it kind of felt like you're on vacation for a little while, and you're thinking, oh, well, I mean, but you're really far away from home. It's not like you just jump on the little, Embraer jet and head off, for an hour flight. So you're really far away from home, very disconnected when I went there. No internet. I used to have this card I would use, and I would go to Hong Kong to call my parents like once a month. And if I called them from China, it was like $3 a minute. So it was crazy. We didn't communicate. It was once a week, maybe for 10 minutes. maybe once every few weeks. So that was my first impression of China. And kind of how I got there, I'll back up a little bit, was I was in the golf program at Mississippi State University. And so I was going over to do an internship, which was pretty radical at the time. It's a little more accepted now. But I went over there and I committed myself to go to it for a whole year, which really turned into 23 years. That was how I got to China. That was kind of the start of my experience.
I went 4 years after Jeff. I went the first time in the year 2000. I was kind of a struggling music student, violin major, and I decided I didn't want to do that for my career, and I had to restart. And I didn't know what to do, and so my wife recommended China because she'd been there before, and I said, let's do it. She could have said Korea. She could have said anywhere. And I just wanted to get out of Dodge and kind of reassess my life. And the funny thing is we arrived and we went straight to Wuhan, actually, which at the time I'd never heard of Wuhan. Now everyone's heard of Wuhan, but I stayed in Wuhan for 10 months. Like I said, I was kind of just an undecided violin music major that wanted to do something else, and landed in Wuhan in 2000, spent 10 months there. And I just had several culture shock issues. I mean, back then, this was 22 years ago. It's crazy to say that, but nobody really spoke much English. I mean, it was really hard to find any English speakers. Restaurants didn't have pictures of the food. Now a lot of them will, especially if there's a bigger overseas foreigner presence, so you can kind of point to what you want. So I remember just not being able to say anything in Chinese. I remember not being able to order any kind of food that I liked. There were no Starbucks. I remember it was a really big deal that year. They opened up the first Pizza Hut in Wuhan. The stuff that really stuck out to me at first was the friendliness of the people. I just felt like they were overly curious and welcoming. To have, to see a face like mine was just something some of them have never done before, or it had been at a distance or rare. Not that my face is anything special. It's just
I'm surprised they didn't run away, Dave.
Yeah, well, some of them did, Jeff. Which surprised me, because I had expected, communist, or maybe there was some kind of tension between the two countries, and it was like the opposite. It was like they wanted to show their warmth, and that was really, really awesome. Obviously, because of my face, Jeff. But I couldn't eat food that I liked because I didn't know how to order it. Another thing that stuck out to me was traffic. Back 22 years ago, China had only been open for 25 or so years, right? And so the idea of even having cars or modern roads was still really new, whereas America has grown up with the automobile for the last 100+ years. For China, it was relatively new. And so you just had people making up the rules as they went, and you just saw the most wild stuff. You'd see buses at night with their lights off going the wrong way down a highway, and nobody even thought that was strange. If you went to a red light intersection, the polite thing to do was to flash your brights, honk your horn, and keep driving, right? People didn't stop because you're supposed to stop. Now, if you go to China now, they've done a lot to enforce rules, and the driving culture is like just modernized. It's matured. And back then, it was just like they handed out licenses to 5 million drivers, said, here, figure it out. And you just saw just people going every which way, driving on sidewalks. It was, 4 or 5 people on a motorcycle, just the craziest of stuff that you would never see in America, although you probably would have seen it, 100 years ago. But it was just, they had these little thing called mamus, which were basically a telephone booth on the back of a motorcycle. You would go say, I want to go here, or somebody would say it for me because I didn't speak Chinese back then. And they'd say, okay, that costs 10 RMB or whatever it was. And you'd say, no, 8. They'd say, no, 9. And you'd hop in the mamu. And it would be a life or death experience where they would like zigzag between buses, and you're in this little, I would almost like a telephone booth sized, seat, just rickety motorcycle shaking back and forth over pothole roads, and so all these really wild experiences. Restaurants, I remember one of the first restaurants we used to like, I saw the chef, everybody smoked cigarettes, the men did, I would say. And I remember seeing the chef going over the wok, with the stir fry thing, his hands going, bobbing up and down with his cigarette in his mouth and his lips, and the ashes, falling straight into the stir fry. It just crazy stuff, that was in some ways difficult to deal with, but it's also really refreshing. It's kind of like seeing a country that just did things a different way. And some ways,
but let's be
like
honest, Dave. You and I both drove on sidewalks. I know I did.
Oh yeah, totally. Because we just followed the car in front of us, or there was a way to get around it.
The wrong way.
Totally. Not anymore though, right? Like that stuff.
No.
And so
No.
China, what appealed to me there was, I was kind of trapped in my profession at the time. I didn't want to do what I had signed up for. And I saw that, somebody like me, if I could learn a reasonable level of Mandarin Chinese, I'd have opportunities. So I just started studying the language. And that side of it was exciting. The opportunity, like the lack of Americans that spoke Chinese was overwhelmingly obvious. And so it was like, okay, this is a chance. And the second thing was the rate of growth. You just felt like China every year was, in America, the rate of change was, almost unrecognizable year over year. And in China, it felt like it was just leaps and bounds. So I'm sure Jeff felt the same way. It just was like, whatever's happening here, it's happening fast. People were risk takers. The country was just on the move. And so for us, we were young. It's like, learn this language, just get grafted into what's happening here, and you're going to have a really exciting ride. And that's kind of where it happened for me.
Yeah. Like everybody goes to China for something different. Didn't so much just choose. David and I didn't choose China. I like to tell people that it's more like, I think China ended up choosing us. Like David said, his wife could have said any country. And honestly, if at the moment in time that I had the choice to go to China, that was the only choice I had been looking to go overseas. If I had three choices, I don't know if I would have chosen China. I only had China as the choice. It was like, okay, I'm going to China. If it was Korea or Vietnam or Cambodia, I would have gone anywhere. It really didn't matter. I would have gone absolutely anywhere. And maybe that's where I would have lived my life. But when I got to China, and I didn't have kind of the same experience as David, like in terms of being kind of maybe stuck in a profession that you didn't like. I love the golf business. I went there to be a golf professional and to try to play some professional tournaments and that I maybe didn't have access to in America. And I did. And I kind of got out there and gave it a go. And then I got into management. And I really didn't think about leaving the golf business for a number of years because I moved up so quickly. I said, when you learn the language, and both of us learned the language in China primarily, and we weren't prepared to go to China with Chinese language skills. We went there and we learned our Chinese. We learned very fast. We were very eager. We were very young, 21, 22 years old. It's very easy to learn languages when you don't have kids running around, jumping on you, and you don't have job. I went there as I wanted to be a golf professional, and I had the opportunity because of the language skills that I acquired, and because I was a PGA professional, an American PGA professional, of which there were only Americans. There were probably in 1997 3, right, in the whole country, and honestly, in terms of foreign golf professionals, and I'm talking about golf professionals in management or teaching, there were probably 10 in the whole country, and there were only like 12 golf courses in 1997. So, they didn't have the skill set. So for me, I was like, oh, well, I kind of fell into things. It was as if, oh, you speak Chinese? Oh, you're a golf pro. Oh, you actually know how to play golf and you call yourself a golf pro, because there were people that called themselves golf pros that definitely were not golf pros. So I kind of had these skill sets that allowed me to like all of a sudden be this in-demand person. And it was like the only person they could call. There was like 3 of us. And I was the only one that spoke Chinese. There was another American guy there. He's still there. He was not a PGA professional. But he spoke Chinese. So there was like 2 of us floating around the country. So the jobs were readily available and quickly moving up. I didn't think about leaving the golf business probably until 4 or 5 years in the nice day. It was probably 2002. And going back to David's point, we were seeing all this development. We were seeing incredible amount of just growth. And, in the golf business, I was managing golf clubs, and golf clubs, even today, are very expensive. In the U.S., you might have a golf club, and if it costs $100,000 to join, that's pretty expensive. It's a pretty expensive club. Well, in China, if it costs $100,000, it's a cheap club to join, especially back then. A little bit cheaper now. There's definitely the highs and the lows. So the people that were playing golf, if you think about China 20 years ago, I mean, it was unbelievable. These were very wealthy people. These are people that had businesses, factories. They were coming across the border from Hong Kong. They were doing stuff. They were movers and shakers. And so I saw all this stuff going on, and I'm very inquisitive by nature. So I was always asking them about their business. What do they do? That's so interesting. I want to learn about, they make shirts. I mean, this is, no shirts are made in China anymore, but back then it was like everybody was in clothing and they were making widgets and they were making this stuff. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I just thought, golly, I'm sitting here as a golf pro. I want to do more. I don't feel I'm respected when I try to have these conversations with these people because it's like, oh, you're the golf pro. So in the beginning, where the golf pro got me opportunities, the golf pro moniker actually held me back, not for long because I busted out, but it was as if people said, "Oh, you're just golf. That's great. You ask me questions about my business. That's awesome. Right? You're inquisitive, and I'll tell you about my business. But you're just a golf pro, right?" And I felt myself being pigeonholed into this thing, and I thought, man, I'm not just a golf pro. Like I can do so much more. And so I just made a decision. No, I'm going to leave the golf business, even if I have to take a step backwards. And so I started exploring those opportunities. And luckily, I did have an opportunity to leave and join a company that made LCDs, which I'm sure we'll talk about later since I'm still in that business. But it was exciting. It was exciting times. And David and I were there at really, it's incredible the timing. China's growth in the last 25 years, and more so in the first, say, 10 of those 25 years, has been phenomenal. I mean, it's been an economic miracle. And we happened to be there at the age that we were there, and with the desires to do the same growth and somewhat mirror. I mean, we're not crazily successful. Other people are much more successful, but we were able to mirror a lot of that growth. It's just different now. I mean, there's opportunities in China for sure. I just looking back, we had the perfect opportunity to succeed. And I think we kind of took the bull by the horns and did okay.
Brother Dave, anything to add?
What it showed me was like, if I'm going to go compete against Elon Musk and whoever else, I'm going to have a tough time. And it's not because I'm an idiot. It's just that, if you go where there's intense concentration of experts already, it's just like a saturated market. It's a flooded market. It's a difficult place. And so only there's the very few are going to be able to, really rise to the top. And what I noticed about China was nobody wanted to go there, whether it was the hardships, it was chaotic, maybe it was dirty, or there was some pollution, or you didn't have the foods you were used to, or those things. So if you're willing to take on those perceived hardships, you made yourself a commodity. You were a rare find. So you just were exposed to different opportunities that if you would have stayed in your comfort zone or followed where the rest of the crowd was going, you would have been competing against a whole host of other people that in some cases may have been more talented or better funded, or just the idea of going where other people don't maybe want to is, I think, a lesson I learned there. The other one is going where there's growth. If you're a genius and you're in an industry that's shrinking or that doesn't have much liquidity in it, I've seen people that are brilliant engineers, but they're in an industry where it's commodity from the other side. It's just been the price, cost, everything is being driven down to a base level. It doesn't matter how smart or how hard you work. There's no money there. There's no growth. So it showed me that just me, right, with my strengths and my weaknesses, being put into a growth stream of a country like China, I was able to grow with it. Some people, like Jeff mentioned, grew faster, did better. Some people did went slower, did worse. I didn't want to be competing against the best of the best of the best in a saturated, work environment. And I also don't want to ever be in a place where I'm going to be in I could say an industry where it's shrinking. I want to be in industries where you can be kind of a first mover, get in early, and then in an industry where there's exponential growth. And China had both of those things. And Jeff and I, we were very young, very eager, energetic, willing to live in less than comfortable environments, take on that adventure, and also learn the language. And so it just played our strengths a lot. But I would just say, whether it's starting a business or career development, I tend to look, is it already saturated by really well-funded, really excellent participants, or is there an opportunity for somebody like me, right? And then also, does it show like strong upside growth potential? And China had both of those at the time. I think it's changed a little bit in that a lot of experts have gone over there, and a lot of people have kind of flooded into that space. So competition's a little stiffer, and it probably was growing at a faster, more aggressive rate historically. But I would say, if I was 20 again, right? Like, let's say I was 20 today, I might not go to China. There are other places where I think you could it wouldn't be the same, but it would mirror some of those dynamics, right? It doesn't even need to be overseas. It could be an industry in America, but it could be overseas as well.
say, David and I, we didn't really choose China. And, people today choose China. And actually in the last 15 years, they've chosen China. Maybe they had an opportunity with work and they chose to go to China, right? Or they had an opportunity to teach English and so they chose to go, or they just wanted to get away and so they chose to go. We didn't choose. And most people back then really didn't choose. It was kind of like, it was really the Wild West. And today, most people know Shenzhen, although it's interesting. People always ask me, where are you from? And I always start, because I've been doing it 25 years. Oh, it's a city near Hong Kong. I always say that. It's a city near Hong Kong. It's called Shenzhen. That's the way I describe it, because up until maybe 10 years ago, I just say Shenzhen and people look like I was like, well, where's that? Is it on Mars? Like, I've never heard of that in my whole life. And it's the same with Wuhan. They'll say that, 2 years ago, even though it's a city of X millions of people, right? I mean, Shenzhen has 22 million people. Now, 25 years ago, I think it had 2 million. And about 50 years ago, it had like 50,000. So, that's a massive growth. So nobody had heard of Shenzhen. When we went to Shenzhen, there was, we weren't expats. We weren't living in the, I used to laugh because I would go to the Hard Rock Cafe. It was there was a couple bars in Shenzhen, and one of them was the Hard Rock Cafe. That was a big deal. It opened up. It was in that Diwan Dasha. I don't know if you remember that, Jason, the big tall building with 2 spires coming out the middle of Futian in Lohu district. It was the first building built. It was in there, and man, we used to go and have a great time. God, we would just go and party. It was this event. It was like, oh, we're going to go eat Western foods. We're going to go to the Hard Rock Cafe, and it took us like an hour and a half to get there. And we would just go out and do what 22-year-olds do. There was just no foreigners. I mean, that's where you saw them. Saw them at the Hard Rock Cafe, which is kind of funny. But now it's just, Dave said, I don't know that I'd choose China. I think I'm just more adventuresome than China. I think be today for a young person who could go over there and honestly live on English their whole life and live on Western food and live in a Western environment and be around Westerners. That just didn't appeal to me then. And even today, I don't live in a place where foreigners live. I live at a golf course. I've been kind of getting away from the city, this urban sprawl, right? It just continues to expand. China, I mean, think about 50,000 to 2 million to 20 million people. It just continues to expand. As it expands, I go further away. I'm like, I get further and further away from the people. And so I live at a golf course, an hour and a half, probably from downtown Shenzhen. There's no foreigners, which I love. I don't have anything against foreigners. It's just that foreigners in China are a different breed. Jason, you and I, we've all talked about this. There's like different types of foreigners, right? I'm not so sure outside of people like David and our friend Joel and a few others. I'm not really looking to hang out with a foreigner.
We could probably leave it at that, but I will capitalize on that. When I met you at Starbucks in Nanshan, probably, I was like, this guy actually, he's not a degenerate. He's not going to ask me to do it.
That's right.
Sketchy. This is so refreshing. I feel safe. My living abroad warm up in Costa Rica, and that was the biggest shock to me. Was like, I'd meet a person from the United States. I'd think, oh, brother, how are you in this foreign land? And then all of a sudden I'd find out, oh, this person's here because something happened in the United States and they left and it was bad. Or, this is weird. So then when I went to China, I was more ready for just being a little more discerning with the expats that I hung out with. Luckily, I met good ones like y'all, but I don't know if I've ever said y'all are good. That's kind of awkward to say that.
Well, it's not awkward when you relate it to China, because boy, there's some odd ones. Like you said, I always like to think it was either a student, an English teacher, a somebody running away from a life problem, midlife, or an expat. The company said, hey, you're going to China, we're going to double your pay and you're going to live in the penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton and we're going to give you all these trips and everything. And they're like, okay, I'm good. And today there's entrepreneurs, there's people that actually go there because they seek out opportunity. And
I heard like California, for example, like in the early days, the gold rush, right? You just had every kind of which type of person. You had the adventure seekers, the outlaws, the prospector, whatever. And I feel like the type of we say foreigner, that's because they call us foreigners in China, right? With every type of foreigner, but a lot of they were the ones that, like you said, they did something wrong in America, or they wanted to do something wrong in China, or they, and just you had just some people where you hung around them, and after 5 minutes you wanted to go, wash your hands and get away from them, type of thing. But you also had your just adventurous. So you just had a eclectic group that was willing to go or needed to go and go there. It's definitely normalized, like almost parallel to my description of the driving habits. It was like anything goes, Wild West. That was 20 years ago. You could YouTube, crazy driving in China. It'll blow your mind, right? It's scary. And we've seen it all. In fact, we've been parts of some of it. It's normalized. And I would say, the business atmosphere is kind of corporatized. It's standardized, all those processes. But it really appealed to that prospector type, that pioneer type. And you had good ones, bad ones, and all the above.
But what was so awesome? So taking on that, because you're in China, right? The opportunity to meet like somebody like David or Joel or them to meet me, right? Like you said, you could quickly discern if you've spent any time abroad, and lived abroad, not visited, you can quickly discern who are the people that are normal, who are the degenerates, who are the ones that are scamming, right? They're scammers, all kinds of scammers, right? And foreigners, right? They're scamming somebody. They're trying to scam a trading deal. They're trying to scam everybody knows a gold miner in China. Everybody knows somebody who can trade oil in China. Like that, I've heard that stuff for 25 years. I got access to oil. We're going to bring it in. We're going to make gazillions of dollars. I know some dude who owns a mine in Africa or Cambodia. Like you could really see quickly. But what you also could see quickly was when you met someone like a David or a Joel, it's not like, I'm in Alabama right now. I grew up in Alabama, went to school in Mississippi. So I go outside and the people that I meet in Alabama, it's interesting because in China, you say often you would meet, probably the first time I met David, and we met at the KFC, by the way, which is pretty awesome food with only foreigners. It's like, it's like an aha moment, you're like across the crowd. It's like, like the sun, the rays come out and there's a foreigner, like, I'm going to make a beeline to this foreigner because I don't see foreigners. Right. And so, but what's interesting, luckily he wasn't a degenerate at that point in time, but, we got along well, and opportunity is such that the pool is smaller of good people, but when you meet that good people, they're doing something. Yeah. They're doing something. They're not just floating along. Whereas like here, home for years, and I've been here because of COVID for 2 years, so I'm used to it now. But when I would just come back and visit, I would be out with my dad, or we'd be going out somewhere, and he'd be like, "Oh, look over there, that's so and so." I'm always like, "What does he do?" Which is kind of a funny question to him. My dad's used to it now, but it was always like I felt it was odd because in China, you meet somebody and go, "What do they do?" Yeah. Where are you from? What do you do? You often get asked how much money you make too, and how much money do you make? Right? Those are the three questions. Where are you from? What are you doing? How much money do you make? And I think in China, when you're out there being entrepreneurial and you meet someone like David or Joel or some of our other friends, and they're entrepreneurial, and you go, oh, it's like everything is turbocharged. It's like everything is fast paced all of a sudden. Anything can be done. Whereas I feel like here in the States, I feel like we've lost some of that edge. And now in Silicon Valley, you get it. People are doing stuff, and I go out to Silicon Valley a lot, so I meet people, and everybody's doing something. Yeah. And that's the thing about China that I kind of take back, especially Shenzhen, because it's not all of China is like Shenzhen. My wife is from Chengdu. They're better now than they were many years ago, but back in the day, they were not doers. They were like, I want to go drink tea and I want to hang out, and I might do some work today. But Shenzhen is like, there ain't no time to drink tea. Shenzhen is we're working, and if I need to meet you on Sunday at 7 a.m. to do some deal or to talk about some project, well, then that's where we're meeting. In America, and I don't have rules in America, but I mean, I know a lot of corporations have rules, kind of like, oh, I don't want to call a guy after 6 o'clock. I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm calling them at 6 o'clock on a Sunday. I mean, maybe I shouldn't. It's just I'm used to that, to other people being that way. And that was the thing. Foreigners floating around. Everybody had a story. Everybody had a deal. But when you met the right ones, it was like, oh, now it's like the opportunity can go so fast.
Y'all been there, and what were y'all doing at the time when y'all met? And let me tee this up a little bit more, because it's very serendipitous when you meet someone that you feel like you can relate to, other than just being from the same continent when you're in China.
I had left the golf business and I went over to a company called International Display Works. It was a company that made LCDs and touch panels, and it was a California company that had a factory in China, in Shenzhen. And I met the guy playing golf, like typically meet people. And he's like, hey, come over and run sales for me. And then I did. And then I started doing procurement. I was running the supply chain.
Yeah.
When I met David, I was running supply chain. And so I remember, and David can tell more of the story, but he was involved in a Swedish factory. And I remember the first time we actually, communicated from a business standpoint was, I remember he called me and said, hey, my factory's having problems getting, I don't even remember what it was, this one thing. Can your team, because we had a much bigger operation, can your team help find it? And that was the first time we started kind of, doing that type of stuff. What was your role when we met?
Yeah, so after I was there in Wuhan for the first year, I came back, learned Chinese at University of Illinois Chicago, and then immediately got a job as an intern to go back to Shenzhen and help set up a factory. That was just the guy that I spoke to Chinese, and the engineers came out and said, you got to do these 10 things. They'd leave, go back to Sweden. I'd spend the next month getting it done, setting up a machine, hiring the person, or painting the floors, or whatever. I would just getting a factory set up and everything that entailed. A year later, they ended up firing the GM, and I was the interim GM. And so I was running a factory of about 50 people, and I went from interim GM to full-time GM. The factory, ultimately I was overseeing so I was two different factories for them, probably 500-600 people, which.
And how much time of starting?
I would say several years, a couple of years. I mean, the first year I was just the intern.
Yeah.
But it was like, it went pretty quickly, that the responsibility curve. I went from being able to, what was really cool is I was able to just make mistakes. I was able to figure it out, and my boss said, well, you're supposed to do 10 things. You got 8 of them done. The other 2, I'm not sure what you were thinking, but let's try it again. And so I was able to learn on the fly. And then when opportunities presented themselves, because, it was a growing organization, they just continued to advance me. I was 20 something years old and overseeing 500 people, which is something that I would not have had if I had just stuck around in my hometown. So we made heating components for automotive and white goods like ovens and that kind of thing. So
it really mirrored my experience in the golf business growth. It's just like you speak Chinese, you're a foreigner, you get the culture, and you know what you're doing, quasi know what you're doing, and then they just hand you their keys, and they don't have anybody else, right?
You're at least trustworthy and you'll work hard.
Yeah.
You're trustworthy and you'll work hard, which, that's the foundation that it started from.
But it seems too like, Dave, that upward progression within your organization wouldn't have happened in America. But nor would you have really gone and said, I really want to work for a company that manufactures auto eating parts, right? I mean,
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
But if all those companies hadn't left the West, right, manufacturing, maybe I would have. Who knows?
Yeah.